Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to view Matinee from 1993. So, I've been waiting for a very long time to see this movie. I've been waiting for like a month to try to figure out a way to see this movie, and luckily I did. I went on to an app called Vidlessy, Vidlesy, and so somehow I was able to figure out to be able to find this movie and watch it, and I was like, yeah, like this is great. So, the theme of this movie is to be escapism, how we take it from the movie maker perspective, who is Lawrence Woolsey, and he, of course, is to try to come up with the next big film and trying to sell people on half man, half ant character. And so Lawrence is to go on and use a big event that is going on in the world to persuade people even more to escape from the fear of possible nuclear war, to then go on and have them escape into the theater to see a horror film, which is kind of a very weird, bizarre-ish approach. And so, honestly, with what's going on in the world and how many big, massive events we've had, I think that this movie is still relevant, even though it mostly ties in the Cuban Missile Crisis and or JFK, and we have like a black and white film and a monster movie that, of course, isn't like fully CGI'd. So with this movie, I had fun with it. I liked the idea, how this movie is mostly to be focused upon a movie theater, kind of like the movie Demons, where the whole idea is that we have these people that go all into this movie theater to see this new movie, to find out within the movie theater that slowly but surely people are starting to turn into monsters and starting to kill one another. And we get to a point in that film where we have to have one hero in the film who is to slay all these demons and kill them all off to defend themselves from this threat. So, Matinee. What is Matinee really and truly about, as I've kind of tiptoed my way in here. So, Lawrence John Goodman's character is to be this movie producer who eventually is to try to find this one-of-a-kind theater experience, having all of these effects being put into his movie, having a almost 3D-like experience where we do legitimately have a Mant in full costume who is to surprise people and scare them. And Lawrence is to also have all these kind of these electrical buzzers that are underneath people's seats. So Lawrence is to find out about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and is to hire people to go on and persuade people to come into this movie, because if they didn't ever think that there was going to be like a time where the world was going to end, people should be more open-minded to a half-man, half-ant character, or alligators in the sewers, now that, of course, like, this day may be among them. So, but not only do we get that side of things, but we also have Gene with his younger brother, Dennis. Enjoying the movie theater experience, having Gene consistently scare his younger brother, and then at some point go to move into this town and be new here, And so Gene goes on to quickly meet up with friends, as a certain number of friends are to have their fathers in the military. Like Gene's father is to be this submarinist, and or submarine military naval officer. So Gene makes friends and then makes girlfriends with not only him but at some point his friend Stan, and with that leads to kind of these fun, goofy stories with all these characters, and also leads them possibly mistakenly get put into this kind of safe room or this bunker to possibly think that the world is legitimately going to end, as this overly paranoid Howard, the movie theater manager, is to possibly think that, like, he is hearing things off the radio, he is seeing that the TV has gone static, and he is so paranoid that the world is going on into ending, as we have Howard, who is to have this little small radio that is to be put into his pocket, where he is to try to consistently know whether or not the world is going to end by listening to this little pocket radio. So, with that said, yeah, this movie was a solid, good film. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm going to go on into hopefully a little bit more specifics. I'm going to hopefully not try to be all over the place, because this movie does kind of go a lot of certain things and stuff like that. But there also might be some backpedaling, because I know that there's like two different things to kind of say simultaneously with what's kind of going on in this film. Because I want to kind of try to cover one thing and then cover the other. So, because there's so much going on. So, with that said, I think it's about that time to just go into spoilers about this one, because it's about that time. Let's go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time to spoil this movie. So, in the beginning of this movie, we of course have Gene and Dennis, who are in this movie theater watching a number of trailers for movies coming soon. One of them called Mant, and there is to be, of course, this movie about people getting hypnotized and so on and so forth. And it seems that most of these movies are to all be done by Lawrence Woolsey, so who of course is John Goodman. So Gene is scaring his younger brother to the point of them going home, and Dennis telling his mother that he wants to go on and he wants to see Man. This is going to be the new scary movie, and Anne, who is both of their mothers, like, no, I think that's going to be too scary for you. And so Anne is realizing that Gene is persuading his younger brother by scaring him to like push him to do this movie or see this movie. So Anne is telling Gene, it's like, you need to cut it off. You need to cut that out. So we have that going on. So Gene eventually is to come home to find that the president is going on and doing this special report. JFK, John F. Kennedy, is to mention that they are to possibly be in war with Cuba right now, and that there may be a nuclear war happening here, and that's the one thing, of course, that they don't want. So everybody is starting to fear the fact that the world may end, to where the point of where they go on and realize, like, well, hey, we gotta live every day like it's our last. Like, if we are going to actually make it to Saturday, like, that'll be an amazing thing. So on the other side of things, we have Lawrence and we have Ruth, and we have Lawrence, who is trying to come up with his within his mind to think of an idea for the next film that he's going to try to sell people, which may be having something to do with an alligator. So Lawrence is coming up with names like Mangator, Manigator, uh, Galgator, Galligator, and so many other combinations for certain next movies. And Ruth is to go on and say, like, well, hey, like, instead of just thinking about the next movie you're going to do, how about instead, like, think about how you're going to pay people, because Ruth, of course, is getting sick from having to run out of towns, really because of how Lawrence had not gone on and paid certain people for the services that they were supposed to do. To the point where Ruth ends up getting uh, into this vehicle and need to go on and have somebody here pay for gas, and Lawrence is to try to get every last bit of money that he has to give this guy to pay for gas. So Lawrence makes it into this town where he, of course, talks to Howard, the theater manager, to have Lawrence try to put all these effects and make this one of a kind like experience. And Howard is to let Lawrence go on and do whatever he wants to sell this whole thing. So once Lawrence is to find out about the Cuban Missile Crisis, we have Lawrence who hires these two men called Herb and Bob. So he hires these two men to be around these movie signs to convince people that, hey, like, we didn't know that the world was ending, like, and we didn't know that alligators were in the like we don't know really now at this point that like alligators aren't in the sewers. So like maybe we can start to really believe that there may be a monster movie out there that is to be truth, that is to be uh, something that is real. And we all of a sudden have Lawrence who's passing on free passes to this movie, and um, and so come to find out, both Herb and Bob, Gene is to find out while being near this movie theater that Herb at one point had worked with Lawrence on this movie theater, or this movie, I mean, and so Gene at some point is to go on and kind of call Lawrence out on this. And Lawrence is like, well, yeah, like I did work with him in the past, but it seems that me and him are at odds with one another. And Gene is like, sure, like I'll go on and I'll tell people that you're not working with him. And Lawrence is like, okay, great. But Gene is like, well, in exchange, like I want to go on and see like what you're doing in this theater. And Lawrence is like, okay, sure, but only for an hour. So, but let's backpedal here. So now we have to go on and cover more of the Gene story. So Gene is to be the new kid in the school, Key West, Florida. So Gene is to go on and find these kids who have certain fathers that are working in the military, and there's to be Andy, who I believe his father is also working in the Navy. And so Andy is like stating a bunch of the things that he's heard, and these kids are like, ah. And so Andy turns to Gene and saying like, hey Gene, isn't your dad also in the Navy as well? And Gene is like, well, yeah, like, and so they're like, okay, so we're kind of getting information from certain kids who know fathers from the military here. So at some point, Stan ends up becoming a fast friend with Gene, and so at some point, this class is to hear these alarms going off. So they all make their way out of this classroom to realize that they need to duck and cover. that they need to hang by these lockers and kind of bury their heads in the sand as they have to put their hands over their head and try to brace themselves for what is to possibly be a drill for an air raid nuclear blast of sorts. So, while everyone is going on and doing that, we have this girl named Sandra who is going on and complaining to this teacher that reasonably there's no way that anybody just putting their hand over their head is going to protect them from a nuclear blast. Like, there's no way to save anybody from this. And Sandra is just trying to be honest here. She's to know the information, and so she's the only one speaking up about this. So Sandra ends up going on to get a week's worth of detention, and so Jean meets up with Sandra, just like, well, hey, how did it go? Like, and Sandra ends up mentioning that, and so we immediately realize here that Jean is going to start falling for this girl who seems to be much more unique than anyone else and is to be very outspoken compared to anyone else. So, with that said, we also have Stan. Stan is to go on and meet up with a girl named Sherry. And both Stan and Sherry are to connect with one another. And we have Sherry who mentions that she at one point was to become lovers with a older guy named Harvey. And that Sherry realized that that relationship was probably inappropriate, but Sherry also had gotten some experience from being in that relationship that was to now, like, I guess, have you believe that this girl, like, knows a lot more than Stan does. So Stan is to completely be okay with that, and so both Sherry and Stan end up kissing. And so, come to find out, we have Harvey, who is to notice both Stan and Sherry kissing, to the point where Harvey pulls Stan aside and is to tell Stan a poem, because Harvey is very poetic, to the point where Sherry is to mention to Stan that, oh yeah, like my older boyfriend, he was very poetic. You want to hear one of his poems? And Stan is like, maybe later. So Harvey ends up stating one of these poems, and it sounds so bizarre. And by the end of it, what he ends up mentioning is tomorrow is like a knife. And immediately when Stan is to hear that, he's like, oh my god, like this guy is going to kill me if I go on and continue to date Sherry. So Harvey lets Stan go, and so Stan calls Sherry, because Sherry had gone on to also ask Stan if he wanted to go to this I think this museum or this like oratorium or something like that. And so Stan ends up coming up with an excuse to try to get out of it. Mention that he's going to go on and pack sandbags at school, and he can't go on and be with Sherry that day. And so they're ending up like going on and rain checking all of this. And Sherry's like, well, you can go another day. And Santa's like, yeah, like, as he's realizing that it's like, oh my god, I now have to go on to figure out another day that, like, I have to kind of, instead of really just stopping all this, I'm trying to just delay it now. So come to find out, we have Harvey, who is to make his way to this bar where he is to go on and drink and meet up with both Herb and Bob. So Herb and Bob are to look at Harvey and just be like, hey, here's another sucker. So Herb and Bob are to scare Harvey into going into this movie theater to see this film. And how Herb and Bob are to say it is that uh, this movie is indecent and it's putting people's lives at risk. And, like, that is to be, like, the big seller for this guy. So, when Harvey drops something and goes on to pick it up, he also steals Bob's wallet and tries to walk away with it. But both Herb and Bob notice that this wallet is gone, and so they grab onto Harvey, get this wallet back, and tell the kid that he needs to go on and get a real job because this racket is not working out for him, as he has already gone on and spent some time in a juvenile prison and he didn't learn anything from that. He didn't get better or become more skillful from that. So, Harvey goes on to work at this movie theater to become the Mant character for this 3D like effect where this Mant guy is going to come out in the movie theater to scare people and then go into the back and continue to hit knobs and hit buttons and do all of these smoke and electrical effects, as well as doing vibrating things and scaring people and so on and so forth. So we have Lawrence, who hires Harvey and is to mention to this guy to not go on past a certain level, which is 6, to do these buttons, because there may be a risk of any number of things happening if they go too far. So now I feel that most of the stuff that all came before is to mostly, in my mind, feel covered. So did I cover all the Gene and the Lawrence stuff? So Gene is to go on with Lawrence and talk about movies, and Gene is to talk to Lawrence when he mentions that Herb had worked with him before, that Gene is to start to see a bunch of people like Vincent Price and like Lawrence and everyone else who is to go on and do a movie like they are his friends, that Gene is to come to those people and they are to help him out through a hard time or a tough time. And that's where he goes on and sees all these people who are to make these movies as to help him escape and lose himself through a film so that way he can go on and be happy. So Lawrence is going on and showing Gene all of these effects to the point of Gene accidentally grabbing one of these chords that is actually live, and Gene almost accidentally electrocutes himself. But Gene is to kind of like tell him to drop that so he doesn't. So Lawrence tells Gene to kind of run off because like there are some risky things here, so Gene leaves. So now we go on and let's kind of cover a moment here. So Gene at some point is to see that his mother is going through home video footage showcasing Gene's father. And so Gene is kind of watching this clip without having his mother realize that he's back there watching this with her. And Gene's mother, Anne, is very teary-eyed and so on and so forth, just thinking about like her husband that is to be at risk of war and so on and so forth. So, but we never actually see Gene's father throughout this whole entire film. So let's get to the movie part. Let's try to cover all of this that happens within the movie part. So we had Lawrence, who had this paranoid theater manager, who is to have this kind of radio on his pocket, and Lawrence is to listen to a bit of that and is to turn it off. And so, because Lawrence wants people to have their mind prepared about what they're about to do for this movie theater, instead of being prepared of what they're about to do if the world is going to end. So, because Lawrence wants everybody at their best. So, Lawrence, before this movie is to be put out to the public, Lawrence takes every bit of staff in this movie theater and is to give them this speech, this big, huge speech about, like, well, hey, if you're going to go on and if you're going to go out there and you're going to tear off the tickets and you're going to be the one giving the milk duds and you're going to go on and you're going to do this and you're going to be the projector and you're going to be the that and this and that, like, everybody needs to go on and, like, really, like, give these people, like the movie magic experience kind of thing. And so to really have Lawrence kind of really go on and give these people, like, this moment that they need. And so all of a sudden Lawrence is to realize that Harvey didn't get this speech. And so Lawrence is to now tell Harvey, it's like, hey, if you're going to go out there and if you're going to scare these people with this costume. And so Ruth is just to be like, yeah, like, and I'm also, like, I'm here, like, stage left kind of thing, to just kind of say, it's like, hey, I'm here also. Because we, of course, have Ruth, who is telling Lawrence, is like, hey, you've given this speech to so many people so many different times. And Lawrence is like, well, yeah, but, like, every time it always works, it always fits. People always buy into it. So Ruth is to go on and switch into this nurse costume because she's having everybody go on and sign these agreements that if anybody is to go on and have a heart attack while watching this movie, that they won't sue because they're going to get so scared they might have a heart attack and sue. So we have Gene and we have Dennis who are like, really? Like, we're like, Dennis is like, we're really not going to have a heart attack, are we? And Ruth is like, well, that's a possibility. Like, people could pass out or people could die while watching this film. So Gene's like, come on, like, it's just a scare tactic. Let's go in there. Let's sign away. So we have Gene and we have Dennis meeting up with Sandra into this theater. And Sandra is with her parents. And Gene, of course, to meet up with Sandra's parents. And Gene is to talk to Sandra about this movie. And Sandra's like, well, is there really a bunch of effects that are to make this movie one of a kind? And Gene is like, rest assured, like, yeah, like, it definitely is. It's going to be one of a kind, like, movie. So Stan is to also be with Gene and Dennis getting into this film because he has nothing better to do now that he lied to Sherry. And come to find out, Sherry's also going with her brother to go and see this film. So, come to find out, Sherry is to find Stan going to this movie. And so Sherry calls Stan out on the fact that he was to be in this movie theater and not stacking these bags like he supposedly was. So Stan is going to tell Gene, it's like, well, hey, like, she had this older boyfriend, and he was threatening me, and I was scared, so I just lied to her. So Gene is to go on and do the right thing for his friend, and probably have Stan at some point owe him one. So Gene goes off to see that Sherry is getting popcorn, so Gene gets up to go after her in this movie. So Gene ends up telling Sherry that Stan needed to come to this movie theater to be with Dennis because Dennis is to have needed Stan's support uh, during this rough time of their father not being in the picture, and that Dennis is to latch on to Stan. And Sherry's like, "Oh my God, that's so sweet, that's so adorable." And so Sherry goes on into the movie theater and is to find Stan and lock lips with him. And so we'll get to say what happens there. But I also want to cover the Mant movie. Let's cover that. So, in the very beginning of this, we have Lawrence, who is giving people this story about this atomic-like environment that at some point it seems that a man had somehow fused with this ant and become one and the same. And so, at first, we go on and see Mant, who is Bill in this film. And so, Mant has at first just the headpiece, but his hands are human. And so, the further we go into this, all of a sudden we have Mant, who is starting to lose control of and turning into a much more animal side of a character. And so Mant goes on and attacks this doctor and goes on and infects him. And Mant is to start to transform his hands into these claw-like things. As well as we also go on into the opening of this movie theater and see these long ant-like legs that are to open up this movie theater, but not the headpiece that we see here for some reason. So we have Mant that is to go on and have the love of his life, and he is starting to lose control here. And we have this woman called Carol, and so Mant, or Bill, goes on to have this claw, and he goes on to grab the rear end of this woman to try and attack her, and all of a sudden we have all these buzzers going off in the entire room to shock all these people from behind to jump up in their seats and be like, what the fuck? So, at some point we have Mant, who is now locked in this prison cell, and we have the Mant who is to go wild, and we have Mant that goes on to eventually get out of his cell to attack somebody, and then go on to grow massive in size to where he becomes this Godzilla-like ant character. And now we have this general going on and having to figure out how to take Mant down. And Carol is to try to convince these people that it's like, well, hey, like, he was my lover. And the general is to be like, well, how can you love a thing like that, kind of thing. So they go on and they supposedly kill the massive ant character. And now we then realize that this doctor is to have been infected by the Mant, and he starts to become one himself, to then all of a sudden have his hand have this claw that is going and attacking Carol. So I wanted to kind of cover everything that happens technically in the movie for the most point. But there's a little bit of things here and there where I just kind of like, okay, like, let's try to figure out how to kind of curve through this film. So now that we've covered all of that, we've got that at least out of the way for the most part. We have at one point where the ant is supposed to come out and surprise people, and Harvey has gone on to toggle all these buttons and then jump out at the back of the theater to scare all these people. By the time Harvey is going through in this masked getup as the Mant, he realizes that Stan and both Sherry are locking lips. And we now have Harvey, who is jealous and is to be heartbroken. So Harvey grabs Stan here and starts punching him. And Lawrence is like, well, hey, that's not part of the act. So all of a sudden we have a number of people who are like, oh my god, like this is really happening. And so Lawrence goes up there and it's to try to defend this kid. And so Lawrence ends up getting clocked for his trouble, and Lawrence just goes back to where Mr. Spector, who is to be the theater owner of this whole place, and or the theater funder. And so we have this Mr. Spector guy going on and saying like, man, this is so amazing. This is a one-of-kind of experience. And Lawrence is saying like, oh, movie magic, all this and that. And like, yeah, it's just for show. So we have Ruth that is telling Lawrence, it's like, I'm not going to get involved in whatever you're trying to do here. I'm not going to go on and have anything happen to me, because there is to, at some point, be a part where there is going to get a nurse be involved in this movie, and Carol or Ruth doesn't want any part of this. So when the Mant is to go on and run off, we have a number of kids that are chasing after it, wanting to kill this Mant instead of focusing on this movie. So, because of course we have Harvey that grabs Sherry and runs off with her, and we have Stan that is to try and chase after them, and Harvey then tries to leave in this car, and Stan has to kind of skedaddle away for them to drive off and him not to get run over. So, come to find out, Harvey immediately tries to get out of this theater to smash right into this car. So Harvey goes right back into the movie theater, where he then is to try and go on and steal Carol, or steal Ruth, the nurse, to then have a knife to her and persuade Lawrence to try to give him his payment for the performance that he ended up doing here, so he could scramble out of here. But in between that all going on, so Stan and Jean and Sandra and Sherry and a number of these characters are all to be back in the back, where Howard, the theater manager, is to hear that the world is possibly coming to an end. And so Howard is to get this static TV, it is to hear this radio, and so Howard ends up grabbing his fish to put this fish into this bunker, this safe room, and all of a sudden it's realized that he doesn't have fish food, so he gets out of there. So Howard is convincing these kids that the world is coming to an end and they need to go into this bunker, and the kids are to want to instead get out of this bunker, but it seems that this safe is starting to close in on them, and Howard wants to get into that room and he can't, and the kids want to get out but they can't. So Lawrence is to chase after Harvey to see what had all happened here, and is realizing that Howard is to mention that like the world's coming to the end, like with all this rumble and all of this chaos, and Lawrence is telling Howard that like, no, like this is like the effects of what Harvey was doing, which was way more than he should have, is making them think that the world is going to end, as Howard is kind of clutching this blazer and putting it over his head to try to protect himself from the collapse of a nuclear war theater. So Lawrence has convinced this guy to try and get these kids out of this safe. And we have Howard who's to mention, like, well, here's the thing, like, this safe is to be set for like months to open this up, so it's not going to easily happen. As well as this guy did not come up with a way to save the air or to have a safe breathing vent come in for these people because they haven't installed it yet. So Lawrence is like, well, we have to figure out a way to open this now. And Howard is telling Lawrence, is like, well, I don't think there is a way to. And Lawrence is like, we'll have to figure something out. So Gene and Sandra are stuck in this bunker. And so they're realizing that they might be the only two ones left in the world that are safe from this explosion. So they realize that they may need to go on and repopulate the world and so on and so forth, as if this is to be like the movie Grease 2, where we have the two people that are stating that they're going to go to war and they'll do it for their country because their country wants them to, and so on and so forth. That goofy song from Grease 2 that I somehow remember. So Sandra and Gene are starting to lock lips here and starting to kiss, and the safe ends up falling over. And so now we, of course, have Sandra's parents, and I think possibly even Gene's parents, because Dennis had called his mother, and his mother had came down to the theater. And so both the kids' parents are to find out that these two are really going on and locking lips. And so they're like, okay, well, I guess they're going to end up together. So we now turn around and have Harvey, who is to try to go on and get his money for this act that he was to go on and try to put on here. And eventually what happens is that Harvey ends up going on to get taken out here. And so now the next thing that they need to go on and do is to try and persuade a lot of these people in this movie theater that is doing a watching of the Mant movie that they need to go on and get out of this theater room, because one of the kids is to have one of this small balcony pieces that falls on top of them. And it seems that with all of the damage that Harvey had done by putting these levels way too high, the balcony is starting to collapse on top of everyone else that is in this theater. So we have Lawrence that comes up with a solution by putting out this effect that it looks like a nuclear bomb had exploded for real in this theater. And so everybody is rushing out of this theater, crazed that a bomb had finally went off and they had experienced this. And so now we have Dennis, who is to make it back into the movie theater, who's in the balcony, and all of a sudden this balcony is to break apart. Dennis is to have, or Gene is to have Dennis kind of jump to him to kind of save him and protect him from this balcony that is falling. And so the next thing that ends up happening is Mr. Spectre is to go on and tell them, like, what's the next thing that they are to go on and do. Maybe not every time make everyone kind of crazily run out of the theater and hurt themselves and so on and so forth, but like there may be something that they could work with here to scare these people out of their seats. So Lawrence is looking at this guy like, yeah, I'm gonna get a big massive payday out of this guy. So really, when looking at it, we have Lawrence and Ruth who are realizing that both Gene and Sandra are gonna go on and like become like a really good couple together. And we of course have Lawrence, who's to tell Ruth that, because it's like, well, yeah, they've gone on and they've seen like the coming attractions, and like that's the reason why they know that they're gonna fall for one another. And Ruth ends up looking at like Lawrence and like kissing him and like having this kind of grin on her face of like, yeah, you're using some kind of goofy movie lingo to justify their love. And that was kind of funny. So with that said, that's how the movie just kind of fizzles out, with Lawrence kind of riding off in the sunset to go to the next town to put up his next movie. So with that said, I hope that covers most of this film, because it took me a long stretch to go on and do so. Uh, Maybe not everything was mentioned within this, so let me know in the comments below if there's something that I forgot about, because I'm sure that there probably was. There's probably a little detail, there's probably a little scene somewhere. Uh, but either way, I'm going to say that I'm just going to try and get out of here, because the more that I think about it, the more that I've probably forgotten 30 different things that at some point I didn't go into heavily detail about. So without a doubt, I'm going to try to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.